shock. Okay, Chris, would you get my Bible from the pulpit up here? I forgot to bring it over. I want to welcome the YouTube audience today to Eastern Shore Community Church. I hope you're all having a fine day today. Thank you, son. We're going to be studying from Acts chapter 27 through 28 today. And 27 is going to be a nice one. And what we find here, 27 and 28 are basically about Paul's travels, his hardships, but also his witness and testimony. You notice that repeats through this, the last few chapters we've studied, is the witness that he brings. Chapter 27, verses 1 through 10, Rocky and Sister Sharon, 11 through 21. And Sean, if you want to read today, how about 22 to 32, and then Pam from 33 to 44. Okay, Rocky?
I apologize in advance for some of my pronunciation.
From the pronunciations, yes. Well, that's accepted because I can't say them either.
When it was decided that we should sail to Italy, they handed Paul and some other prisoners over to Julius, an officer in a Roman army regiment called the Emperor's Regiment. We went aboard a ship from Adramyttium, which was ready to leave for the seaports of the province of Asia, and we sailed away. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. The next day we arrived at Sidon. Julius was kind to Paul and allowed him to go and see his friends, to be given what he needed. We went on from there, and because the winds were blowing against us, we sailed on the sheltered side of the island of Cyprus. We crossed over the sea off Cilicia and Pamphylia and came to Myra in Lycia. There the officer found a ship from Alexandria that was going to sail from Italy, so he put us aboard. We sailed slowly for several days, and with great difficulty finally arrived off the town of Cnidus. The wind would not let us go any further in that direction, so we sailed down the sheltered side of the island of Crete, passing by Cape Salmon. We kept close to the coast.
Take care.
And with great difficulty came to a place called Safe Harbors, not far from the town of Lycia. We spent a long time there until it became dangerous to continue the voyage, for by now the Day of Atonement was already past. So Paul gave them this advice: "Men, I see that our voyage from here on will be dangerous. There will be great damage to the cargo and to the ship, and loss of life as well."
But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, "Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me, and have not loosed us from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. Now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship." I skipped some. Okay, I was going to start at 11, right?
Yes.
Okay. Nevertheless, the centurion believed that the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. And because the heaven was not commodious to winter, and more than part advised to depart thence, also by any means they might attain to Phoenicia, and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete, and lieth towards the southwest and northwest. And when the south wind blew softly, supposingly they had obtained their purpose, losing thence, they sailed close to Crete. But not long after there arose against it a tempest wind, called Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. And the running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat, which when they had taken up, they used helps, undergirding the ship, and fearing lest that they should fall into the quicksands, strake sail, and so were driven. And we being exceedingly tossed with the tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tacking of the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was taken away. But after a long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me, and not loosened from Crete, because we have gained this harm and loss.
Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, Do not be afraid, Paul, you must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God, but that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little further on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go.
And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take food, saying, This day is the 14th day that we have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. Wherefore I beseech you to take some food, for this is for your health, for there shall not an hair fall from the head of any of you. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread, and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then were they all of good cheer, and they also took some food. And we were in all in the ship 276 souls. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. And when it was day, they recognized not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust the ship in the ship. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, and loosed the rudder bands, and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore. And falling into place where 2 seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the bow struck fast and remained unmovable, but the stern was broken with the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that they who could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. And the rest, some on board, and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they all escaped safely to land.
All right. So we find here that in this chapter, it's about Paul's journey. Paul tells them, advises them not to sail because of the season. You know, the season was a season for great storms at that time. It was getting into the winter season. We have a season that has great storms. What is that season called?
Summer.
No, it's called hurricane
Oh,
season.
yeah, well.
You know, hurricane season, you know, a lot of ships have been, in past times, have been lost in hurricanes and great storms, nor'easters that come across and stir up the storms. Remember Sandy Point or in New Jersey? We've had other storms that have taken this past storm that came up, took a lot of the sand out of the beaches. There were 10 and 15 foot drops on the shore where all the sand had washed out. And so, you know, Paul knew better because he was being led by the Lord. He knew he had an appointment with Caesar, which would give him opportunity to witness. But he found himself now being overruled because he was not the ship captain and he wasn't the soldiers. He was a prisoner, but he was advising him not to sail, and here they sailed out. In our lesson this morning, when you look on here, historical context, Mediterranean sailing, winter sailing was dangerous. Ships often waited for spring. Roman shipping, grain ships from Egypt were massive for their time. Atlantis location, strategic island between Sicily and North Africa. Rome's expectations was Paul's arrival fulfilled his long-stated desire to visit Rome. In chapter 27, we find here the shipwreck, the storm, the dangerous journey. Luke accompanied Paul. Following his loyal friendship, Judas the centurion treated Paul with consideration and hidden truth. Paul's advice without sailing was ignored despite his experience. Do you find sometimes as a mechanic that it's difficult to take the customer's advice? You know, if you're a mechanic, or sometimes I find it difficult to take my wife's advice when she says turn here, and I keep on going because I think I know a better way, and it turns out that, well, I run into more traffic and more difficulties. She knew a better way. But sometimes because you're the head or because you're in leadership, it's hard to take advice, isn't it? And, you know, we can look, you know, it's a little cool in here, ladies, I know, because the heat was down. And, oh, by the way, YouTube, the reason why some had to leave, there was a situation that came up that they had to go. But we find, you know, the issues come up when things just don't work out. They thought they rolled the dice, so to speak. The Roman centurions and the ship captain figured, you know, we're going to get by. We've got good skies. We've got smooth sailing. We'll get there just as quick. We won't have to stay in winter, which costs us money and delays delivery of our goods. All right, so practical wisdom is often overlooked when it conflicts with our plans. How about traveling? Something comes up, the weather changes, and you still want to make the trip, but you have to delay it. It kind of breaks your heart. Or, like I know some that had vacations planned for Jamaica and the islands down there in the Caribbean, when that hurricane hit, it destroyed everything. They had to cancel their plans. They had to reroute things, to do things other ways. And it's disappointing when things interrupt, things that's out of our hand, that we can't change, and we have to deal with it. So often we lack sometimes choosing the right course. Sometimes we press ahead, even though we know we could have some difficulties. And so here is the same thing that happened here. The soldiers and the ship captain said, we'll press ahead. Then they ran into the storm, and what happens next? What happens next on the storm?
That people were saved.
Well, we know he tells him an angel appeared to him and that they were saved, but what happens next? The storm came up. All right, so the captain and the Roman guards, everybody realized that they had made a grave mistake, a grave error. They had put, number one, all the lives on board, but they were enriched with the grains from Africa, wheat and stuff that was supposed to go to Rome and other shipping ports along the way. There was a lot of economic issues here that caused the ship captain to sail because he wanted to make a profit. He wanted to get the goods delivered. But not only that, he failed to realize the value of the loss that they were going to lose. Because in the midst of the storm, we find that they're tossing out everything. They're tossing everything to lighten the boat. They're tossing all the tackling. They're tossing out everything they can to lighten the boat. They're in this storm now 14 days. Can you imagine being on the sea? Now, I'm not a sailor. I mean, I would be done, probably washed overboard before then. It would take Paul hold me on because I would be freaking out. You know, have you ever watched some of these shows about the fishermen going through this hurricanes and storms with these boats, 50-foot waves, 60-foot waves, and it's bigger than the ship itself, and they're like a cork floating out in the great ocean, and they're being tossed by these heavy winds that are wrapping around and tossing and pushing them. They can't even sail. They had to bring the sails down. And they're trying their best to keep a course. Can you imagine now? They had crude compasses. Now they guided themselves by the stars, so they had no stars to look at in the storm. And the compass, have you ever seen some of these old-time compasses? It's like in a liquid, and it would spin for the magnetic north and give them a reading of which way they were going. Here's a ship that's tossing up and down like an elevator, going up and down and just going back and forth, that probably could not even see the compass or read the instrumentation of knowing where they are. It's dark, it's rainy, they can't row, they can't do anything. The helmsman is probably fighting for everything he can with a group of people trying to guide the ship and keep it from being capsized by the huge waves. And they went through this 14 days. Now Paul knew his mission, that he had to appear before Caesar. He knew his mission. He had not eaten. He was fasting before the Lord. And who was he praying for?
Praying for the crew.
He was praying for the people on board, the prisoners as well as the crew. He was praying for their lives, for their safety. He wasn't praying for the economics of the boat. He wasn't praying to save the grain. He wasn't praying to save the possessions. He wasn't even praying for God to save the ship. He was praying for the lives of the people. And we know that when in the verse here he talked about the keeping the people on the boat. Why would Paul tell the captain and the soldiers to keep the people all on the boat? Why would he tell them?
If we stayed together, they'd all survive.
Yes, he told them they would all stay. But what would reason would say, let down the lifeboats. Try to make it to some shore in the lifeboats.
But then they would have no way of getting ashore themselves.
They would not have no way of getting to shore. And not only that, if the big ship is having problems staying afloat in the water, a lifeboat dinghy is not going to survive either. It would be overcome, it would be taken away and washed away. So Paul's praying for the lives of the people on the boat. He's also in communication with the soldiers. He's in communication with some of the prisoners. He's in communication with the captain. He tells them on the 14th day, they've come to the 14th day, and Paul says, an angel of the Lord stood by me and told me that we would all not sacrifice being killed or drowned in this water as long as we stayed on the boat, but all lives would be saved, which encouraged them. And not only that, what did Paul do after he had told them about this?
Wanted them to eat.
Yes, he wanted them to eat. But what did he do? He had a service. I believe he had communion. You know, there's always salvation in a foxhole, so to speak. You know, everybody repents in a foxhole. You're going to get shot. The soldiers, the enemy's coming overboard. You're praying, God help me. Save me from this situation. I don't want to die. So here, I don't care whether they didn't believe in the Hebrew God or not. They were all converts at this time. Because now Paul was leading the ship, basically. The captain had no power of the ship. He had no authority of fighting the winds. The Roman soldiers was at the ships at the mercy of the winds and the conditions, and the only one that had confidence, the only one that had a surety that all would be saved and would be safe was Paul. So they ate, they actually took more bread for themselves. They ate and they had prayed, and when Paul had prayed, they ate, and everybody was filled with enough food to give them strength for the next step, which meant they weren't just saved right away. What happened to them? They took soundings, found they were getting closer to land, and soundings meant they had a lead, kind of a sinker, a heavy lead sinker, and what they would do is let the rope down until it hit bottom. When it hit bottom, they had a measurement, a sounding of 15 fathoms. They could tell how deep it was. So it might have been 20 feet, 30 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet. And when they realized they were coming to ground, what was the wisdom of the ship's captain to do? Cut the anchors, because they had anchored. He cut the anchors and drove the ship in to land. They entered in an area, it was fixed, and all of a sudden, because the waves were hitting, now that the boat was fixed on a piece of rock or sand or whatever it was caught on, now the waves were beating against that ship and breaking it apart. Now, Roman orders were that when you come into a situation that you could not control the prisoners, you would kill them. Paul knew this, and he told the Roman centurion, don't kill the prisoners. Let them. We're all going to survive. So the Roman soldiers believed Paul over protocol, over what their orders were, or what the way they were to do, because they trusted Paul's word more than they trusted everybody else's at that time in that condition. And so now they find themselves, the ship breaking apart. Some floated to the shore by pieces of wood of the ship. Some was swimming. Some did other things, but they found themselves on shore. And I can tell you right now, have you ever come out of a situation you almost want to kiss the ground? The first time I flew in an airplane, I was terrified. The stewardess gave me the wings and put on me because I was such a good boy. And I was, a 30-year-old man. But I was terrified with that thing going, boom, 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 on the runway. And it finally lifted up, and it was nice and calm. And all of a sudden you hear this thing, put your seatbelts on, we're running into some turbulence. And you're feeling that shaking. You got no ground to touch. You got nothing to touch. I mean, it really messed me up. And although the stewardess didn't have to hold my hand, but she was aware that I was kind of shaking because I was afraid of heights. I didn't like heights. And but the Lord got me over that. But the thing of it is I had no control. I had to trust the pilot of the plane. Unfamiliar what was going to happen to me. And when it went to land, he turned that plane on its side and I could look at the ground down there out of the window. And that was scary enough because you felt, well, I'm dropping out of the sky. And when he turned it and then he reversed those engines, that was the best feeling I'd ever had. When I heard those wheels chirp, chirp, touch down, I was so happy to get back on the ground. And I told myself I'd never fly again, which was a lie to myself because I have flown. But that first experience was not a happy experience for me. Can you imagine? There might have been some people on that ship that was their first experience on that boat, on a ship. And when they got to shore, can you imagine those that couldn't swim? Grappling, they were trusting, they were probably praying, I trust in the God of Paul. I trust in the God of Paul. Get me to the shore. I trust in the angel that told Paul. They'll grab onto anything. Now, you're probably laughing at me, you too, but you probably got a rabbit's foot or a lucky horseshoe or something hanging someplace or lucky this or lucky that. Come on. We all attach things. When we're afraid, in fear, we attach our fear to things. So next week's lesson is going to be on the shipwreck. Now, I really want to get into that, but right now our time is short. And what I want to ask you something today is, what have you gotten out of this lesson? That in the adversity of how Paul has faced all these things, even when people of authority that were Roman guards, they were cruel and hard, they were supposed to be. They were the elite of armies at that time. Centurions. So they were a proud bunch. Can you imagine how hard it was for them to take direction from Paul? Have you ever seen proud people try to take direction? It's a failure almost instantly. So I want to read something here. I've got a little bit here I want to read. The final 3 chapters of Acts present Paul's dramatic conclusion of his missionary journeys, not as he planned, but as God ordained. We see a man in chains who remains unchained in the Spirit, a prisoner who continues to proclaim freedom, and a journey to Rome that becomes one final opportunity to witness to the power of the gospel. Paul always gives his testimony. He was before Agrippa, he was before Felix, and he was before governors and magistrates, and also the soldiers. They knew his witness. The lessons in the storm. Human wisdom isn't always right. Can we agree with that? The experienced sailors ignores Paul's warning and sets sail, leading to disasters. Sometimes worldly wisdom contradicts divine guidance. God's promises are sure. In the midst of the storm, an angel assures Paul, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you." That's found in chapter 27, verse 24. God's purposes cannot be thwarted by storms. My goodness, I hope and I declare that I'm not going to say the word wish. I would hope and anticipate that all ministers and pastors and servants of God would get this lesson. If God has told you His purpose, no matter what storm comes on, it's not going to change His purpose. Paul was assured of this. Faith in the darkness. Paul tells everyone, keep your courage because I have faith in God that it will happen just as He told me. This faith, believing God's word even in circumstances scream otherwise. And the last point, presence matters. Because Paul and 276 people were saved from drowning, our presence as believers can be a blessing to those around us, even around unbelievers. Now think about that. Our presence can change the atmosphere. How many of us have ever been in a hospital and when a pastor walks in to speak to your pastor, it makes you feel somewhat reassured that someone's there that has spoken to God, knows your circumstances, and it gives you confidence, more faith. Your faith arises even in the worst of circumstances. How many of you have close friends? How about a child? When you were a child, your father, you were lost, and then you saw your father or your mother, and then you ran to them. You were so assured and so uplifted because of their presence. The same must apply to us as children of God. Jesus, as we sang the song this morning, Jesus knows your name. Do we really actually believe that Jesus shows up in our darkest times? Do we trust him? You know, I've had to battle with some of my own emotional issues, with what I'm going through with my health. And my wife asked me the question the other day, do you believe the Lord is healing you? I said, yes. She said, do you really believe? And it really struck me because she knows me. I thought, well, you don't have to ask that. But I do get depressed at times, you know. I have my low points and I have my high points. And she's right. Do we really, really believe and trust that God is going to take us to the other side through our circumstances? Paul gives a great example here. 14 days, I just cannot imagine 14 days of darkness, wind blowing, probably 40 and 50 foot waves that he had to battle, and the ship being broken up, and 276, I think it is, souls were saved. Not a life lost because of God's promised word to his servant. Heavenly Father, we thank you and we give you glory. We honor you. We ask, Father, this morning that I know that it was a short lesson, it was simple. But Father, do we really trust you in our storms? Do we really trust you in our hardships? When we know that you have promised to get us to the other side, even in the darkness, even in the absence of fellowship with others, even when we're isolated, do we truly take the promise to heart? Father, I pray today that you would bring a reassurance. Lord, that we would learn to trust because darker days are ahead. I know, Father, that trying times are ahead. Challenges in our life are ahead. Lord, we must get this down now before those challenges come. Can we trust in the midst of our storms? And so, Father, I asked, oh Lord, to touch those in YouTube land, those that have need today, those that are dealing with dark times in this holiday season. Maybe they lost a loved one in this time. Maybe they're dealing with finances in this time. I don't know. But you know, Lord, you know their circumstances. I pray that they would call out to you, just as Paul called out to you, Lord, in the midst of his turmoil. And you spoke to him, you led him. Teach us to hear you, hear your direction. And so, Father, I give you glory, I give you honor in Jesus' mighty and holy name. Amen. This, because I have my coat on there, that thing digging in. Whew, it's hard to get up.